Hi, I'm Don Taylor, the chairman of the Learning and Skills Group. We're in London celebrating another great learning technologies summer forum. That's when the group gets together and we share some of the things we've learned in the 5 months since January's conference. And we start thinking about what are the targets we have to tackle between now and the end of the year. We're doing 3 Google Hangouts today, part of taking the conference out into the wider world. And with me is Sheena Whyatt of Lightning Training. I've got to just point this out. Sheena's got a badge here. Very bashfully, she's taken off. It says Sheena Whyatt, award-winning trainer and entrepreneur, because that's what you are, Sheena. You're award-winning in every sense. Thank you for being here. You're doing a workshop later on today, and it's about how to maximize impact. It's something I'm very passionate about, how we get the learning and development profession to be much more proactive, going out into the business and doing what it should do, which is being part of the business rather than simply being a fulfillment house and taking orders. You've had to build your business on being able to work with people who want things from you. You can't say yes all the time, can you? So in a nutshell then, you're talking about maximizing impact and improving your influence. We've got like half an hour to talk about this. What's the one thing someone should take away to say, yeah, that's the thing I'm going to use to maximize my influence or to improve my impact?
Flexibility, I think, is absolutely the key.
Right.
You know, that transition from just reacting to a request or actually being proactive for the reasons behind a request. It's a big sea change from one to the other. You use the phrase order taker, and that's a really good point to start. You know, people come to you with normally a learning need or a perceived need, and they just want that need to be met. But if you are simply being a yes person all the time, then eventually that just becomes a one-stop shop. All you have to offer is that one thing, that one solution. So one of the major things that I would say about increasing your impact in your L&D environment is look at ways of being flexible and reacting to those requests and then taking it forward from there.
So it strikes me there's a bit of a, not contradiction, but possibly a contradiction. If you're overly flexible, you might end up saying yes to everything. And then you suddenly haven't any impact at all because you're just a yes person. So how do you be flexible enough to find solutions, but firm enough or rigid enough to say thus far and no further?
I think one of the key things there is, first and foremost, asking lots of questions. When learning needs come to me, for example, it's generally, this is what we think we want. And as an L&D professional, you have to look at that request and think, is that really what you want? Or is it what you think you want? And then you start to ask those questions around it. And very rapidly, you can build up a picture then of, is this something I can actually do for you? And you're quite right. It's really easy. I think particularly when you're building a business, you want to say yes to everything because you're scared of a lost opportunity or the potential of a lost opportunity. But it's very easy to fall flat on your face if you go, yes, that's fine. I can do advanced underwater basket weaving for you next week for a group of 30 people, and then wing it because it shows. So part of that process of being flexible is asking lots of questions about why that learning need has come to the front. Excuse me, if you're asking for practical skills training, what's the reasoning behind it? And then, as you say, if you look at that and think, you know, advanced underwater basket weaving is your learning need, and I can't help you with that, I think it then ties into that area of credibility. If you build up a network of fellow trainers, either who work with you like my guys do, or that you just know through a professional network that you can refer and recommend, that then gives you that credibility of, I might not be the right person to do this for you, but I can put you in front of somebody who could.
I want to come back to the questions in a minute, because I think that's the key thing. What questions do you ask and when do you ask them? But coming back to this point about flexibility, you said at the beginning, well, it's flexibility that you need, but then you're also talking here about some of the other attributes you need. You need to have a good network of people to rely on, and so on. It could sound to somebody listening in, well, this is just somebody who's an external provider, but actually, I firmly believe that everything you're describing refers not just to people who run training companies, but also to anybody running a training department.
Absolutely. And I've worked in that environment in the past, and understanding where your strengths and weaknesses are within that internal team is very important. And sometimes that might mean having to go outside the internal team to meet a need. But communicating that and retaining that credibility is really important. It's as important to know when to say no and effectively to hold your hands up and say, I can't do that for you. I want to do it for you, but I can't. I will put you in touch with somebody who can, is as important, I think, about starting to be seen as basically a solution provider. And as you said, not an order taker.
So you're talking here, you started off saying flexibility, now you're also talking here about credibility. To paraphrase it, what we're talking about here is you've got to be flexible up to the point where that threatens your credibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is credibility for you?
It's walking the walk and talking the talk. And I know that's a very sort of cliche
I wasn't going to say it, but it's a cliche response.
I'm allowed, I can roll it out. They're an award-winning trainer.
You are an award-winning trainer and entrepreneur.
But it is actually really important, because if you don't have that understanding of what it's actually like to deliver, whether or not that's, sort of, I want to use the word old-fashioned, if you like, classroom-based training, whether it's whatever it is, if you've stepped too far away from that, then you're not able to ask the right questions and give the right answers. So part of that element of credibility is making sure you know your stuff. You've got to be knowledgeable enough without being patronizing or overbearing. You've got to balance that element of nurturing that process of getting somebody to really think about what their learning need is, rather than just, what's my plaster fix? I've got this issue and I just want it to go away. And in order to do that, you have to know what you're doing. And that's not just about being able to deliver great sessions. It's also understanding what needs to happen beforehand for those sessions to be great.
And one of the things that needs to happen beforehand is this business of questioning. So what questions do you ask? Who do you ask them to? And when do you ask them? So that's, for me, it's all that stuff that happens up front, which is so important. If we don't get that right, then we chase our tails. So what, who, what, when? Well,
the who is the biggest challenge of all, usually. And certainly in my sphere as an external training provider, that who can sometimes be somebody a very, very long way removed from the why. And so their understanding of why that learning need has come up may be completely different to the actual learning need itself. So literally start off with, I properly have, never underestimate the good power of a to-do list or a piece of paper. I have a little checklist that I use that has some key questions on there. And the first actual key question that I would ask in that situation is, who is the training for? Not what do you want, but who is it that you...
Who's it for? Not what do you want, but who's it for?
Yeah, who is it for? Because that then gives me an immediate indication of what kind of level in the business they're looking for, a skills gap either to be identified or to be filled. Sometimes the who that is making the initial request might not have that answer. So if there is that lack of who are you going to deliver this learning to, then I get the opportunity to ask, is there somebody I can speak to who would be able to help me with that? Sometimes it's not, sometimes they don't want to do that, or there isn't somebody who's willing to take that responsibility. And then you start to ask the more detailed stuff underneath it. What is it that you want this learning to achieve? Do you want to increase skill, change behavior? Do you want to do both? And if you don't know, then you get into a different rank of questions after that.
Well, if you don't know, then there's a serious problem, isn't there? But too often that is the issue.
Absolutely.
Coming along, it's the plaster fix mentality. Fix my team. They're broken. Normally, they need time management or something like that. At that stage, very often the manager or whoever is coming in knows what they think the target audience is. They think they know what needs to be done. But they are unconsciously incompetent because really they're not aware that the fault lies elsewhere.
That's right.
So what do you do in that situation?
Well, I think this is where sometimes you can overthink a problem, because the temptation would be to go, we need to do a full and complete learning needs analysis before we can even do anything. But actually, you don't need to do that. Sometimes you can just turn that around very quickly by saying, why don't you let me talk to 5 of your key people that you want to receive this learning to understand, or ask them what they think it's for. Then I can come back to you and say, you think you need time management. What we're actually looking at is communication skills. They're not seeing the same thing. It happened quite recently to me with a client who wanted customer service training, and it became very apparent that that's not what they needed at all.
Obviously we can't say who the customer was, but this is a classic case. Oh, my team aren't, selling enough, processing fast enough, whatever. They need X. What was the actual issue?
The actual issue was communication within the team. So the management was seeing this as it being customer service issue. We're not getting what we want to achieve with our external client base. But the reason that that wasn't happening was because that team were not communicating with each other. And again, you can ask all the questions that you like. Sometimes people are giving you the answers that they think you want to hear. So, if that request has been for customer service training, you can ask the questions and it will come back in that way. Where the flexibility and credibility element of that response comes in is when you turn up to deliver what you've been told they think they need, and then you realize it's something completely different. And, if you are skilled and knowledgeable enough, or you have a team who are skilled and knowledgeable enough that work with you, then your reaction to that is a big difference between falling flat on your face or being that very inflexible training provider. We've all seen them, no, I've come here to deliver.
I've come to do X and this is what I'm delivering.
Or I'm leaving, the door's over there and I'm walking out of it. And, you can't do that. By that stage, it's not just about any monetary investment that's been made. You're there and it's your job to provide a solution. And
your entire reputation's on the line. This is not just about classroom training. The same is true if you've been told, oh, we need a course on whatever and put it online for us. And it turns out that's not what's required. Of course, if you're designing a course, you can go back and say, well, we need to respecify, let's fix it, whatever. If you're doing a face-to-face course, you have to be presumably much fleeter on your feet to say, well, actually, rather than X, we're doing something a bit more like Y today.
Yes, I'm sure we have a group activity whilst I go off and think, oh, well, how am I going to do it? Yes. But yes, and that's where you draw on your knowledge. That's, I think, is really fundamental. And certainly when I'm looking at trainers who want to come and work with me, that's something that I look for them to be able to adapt to. I will ask them to present A and then give them Y instead and say, could you do a little bit of that? And it boils down to that. If you can walk the walk and talk the talk and you understand what it's like to be in that position, then you can help people get that credibility across and that flexibility. But sometimes it doesn't happen, and certainly that has also happened to me.
What doesn't happen?
You can't provide a solution.
And
you've asked the questions, you've got the answers, you've prepped the course, you've turned up to do advanced underwater basket weaving, and you find that what they want is communication strategies.
Well, they want what they need.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very good question, because they think they've asked you for what they want, but of course it's reacting to what they need when you get there. But sometimes you can't do that. Particularly if it's a practical course, if you've turned up to deliver productivity training using a particular application, it's not as easy to go from... You
can't switch that out to something else.
No, and in which case that's when you have to be confident in expressing your no. But the flexibility and the credibility comes into that again, in that if you're going to have to turn to a client and say, as I have done quite recently, I have turned up to give you 2 days of project management training. What you're actually expecting is 2 days of hands-on Microsoft project training. Yeah, that was nearly what I said. Oh, right, not, and of course, I'd not had any of that preparation there, or indeed actually the software to be able to use it. So in that case, I had to explain that, obviously, this wasn't the brief. And, if we refer back to our conversations, so I can't do that for you today, but I could do it for you tomorrow. So it's that whole idea of knowing when to say no, but also...
But not inflexibly.
Yeah, exactly. Softening your no with a little bit of yes.
I'm sort of picking something else out here. We're talking about the requirement for flexibility. We're talking how that is trumped by credibility. Are both underpinned by or supported by process? So you're talking about the need to go back and say, well, look, actually, we can see the specification process we went through, and this is what we wrote down. And you can see that you want, this is what we agreed, but now you're saying you want this. Is there an extent to which, to be really credible, you've just got to have those boring processes in place?
Yes, I think so. Because I think what it also helps you do is identify potentially where there've been elements maybe of Chinese whispers, where, it's just that communication has broken down somewhere in between. But it's also, I think, a really essential part of getting engagement and from your client as well as from your provider side of the equation to say, this is what you've agreed, this is what you've asked for. Take ownership of that. And, we can provide that, but there has to be that agreement beforehand. And that's certainly something that I do, is There's, you know, that classic, this is what I think you said.
Yes. Can I just repeat this back?
Can I just make sure that's what, and okay, and if you're happy with that, that's how we're going to go forward.
Do you think some people, either working within organisations or outside organisations, are, I'm going to be blunt, too scared of hearing a no or hearing a disagreement to ask that really important question? I'm just going to repeat back to you, because that crucial question can solve or can prevent so many things happening downstream. So why is it we don't ask it?
I think you're absolutely right. I think particularly if you're in a position of either building a business and you have that fear of, if I say no, I may never hear from this person again.
This looks like what they want. I don't want to upset the apple cart.
Absolutely. And again, that can also happen within a team. Sure. You know, we're being asked to provide this service. If I say no, what happens if I say no? And, you know, I think having that process there, or having a process there, also gives you a little bit of confidence in the whole, I have done these steps, I have asked these questions, I have had this engagement from the people or the person who is making this request. But it's also how you ask them to engage with it. So instead of it being a very formal sign that, and, you know, from there on in, your blood is mine, and, you know, your firstborn child, is, you know, the whole, are you happy? It's just softening your language to make it more inclusive, so that they are not feeling like you're putting them in a corner, or positioning them in such a way that they feel they can't challenge what you are prepared to provide.
That's a really good point. People have to be in a position where they do feel they can challenge it. I know it's a much smaller example, but working with speakers for this conference and also conferences, I always try to use the phrase, I just want to check you're comfortable with what we've arranged.
Yeah.
Because people, I think, feel okay with saying, well, actually, I feel a bit uncomfortable about that. They don't feel okay if I say, this is what we agreed, isn't it? That's a presumptive close. Very difficult to get somebody to disagree with it. And if you really want success, you have to give the person you're working with the chance to disagree.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got credibility, trumping flexibility. That's supported by this idea of processes underpinning it all. But you also talked about something else, which is the skill and experience of the people involved. In other words, your credibility is based on your ability to deliver. Yeah. What, for you, are the key factors in building, or what sort of things are you looking for in that experience, and that a combination of experience and skill, because experience by itself is nothing if it's not good and you don't learn from it. But the combination of experience and skill, what are the key good ones that you need, and what are the ones which are not exactly disposable, but they're not crucial to building credibility?
I think the key thing actually is that you have to enjoy what you're doing, and that has to show. Right. And you know, we've all been, shall I say, subjected to learning experiences where you can tell somebody's going through the motions, and it filters down so quickly. So one of the first key things about having an impact in that way is, don't just do it, love it and do it. Be enthusiastic, challenge people. Don't feel that you have to do it in a particular way because that's how it's always been done. Don't trip yourself up either. You know, it's very easy to go for radical new delivery styles and look a bit of a idiot. You know, sometimes old-fashioned is fine. Yeah. What I look for are trainers who have drive, they've got energy, they speak well. Again, that's one of those things that you just assume that somebody whose job it is to communicate can communicate well, and that's not always the case. They need to be able to be reactive. Again, when you're sitting watching somebody plowing through instructor notes, and you have that moment of thinking, hello, you know, there is a whole room of people here that you need to interact with them, is also having that confidence. Yes. As I've mentioned before, knowledge is key. You know, winging it shows. And, you know, you need to make sure that those sort of three elements are there. Know your stuff, be confident, and in that, not just be confident in your material, that's that element of knowing your stuff, but be confident in how you're delivering it. Don't try and be somebody that you're not.
This business of both actually the sheer physical business of being able to speak properly, but also the more metaphorical business of having a voice, I think are both really important. You have to sound like it's you, because apart from anything else, if you are speaking in a classroom and it's not you, it's incredibly exhausting. After a bit, you just get run down. Now, what you're talking about here is obviously focused on the classroom, and I think there's an overlap there to a degree with doing other stuff like online stuff, and there's other stuff online which is completely different. Certainly, you've got to have the knowledge. I think there's no question about it. Otherwise, why on earth are you there? Really, the experience is crucial as well, because you've got to be able to draw on those bits of knowledge you've picked up along the way of just doing it. So whether it's, I'm in a classroom, I can sense something's not right, to, I know when we did that last time, it didn't work when we laid something out this way for whatever reason. But of course, there are some things which are different. I mean, particularly with, although you may disagree, with online, people who are producing online courses, very often they're asked to produce a course working with subject matter experts. And that's a very large part of their job. Whereas I'm suspecting that for somebody who's producing courses for a classroom, that's less. Or would you disagree? You say that sometimes you are thrust into that position.
It is a disagreement, because sometimes you are, and I think particularly with the approach and attitude towards learning provision at the moment, which is trying to get as much bang out of your buck as you can get, that there is a perception that taking classroom content and providing it online is a more cost-effective solution. Your skills sometimes need to be a little bit different. You obviously don't get that interplay of being able to see, not just when things are not going well, but it's also, as a trainer, sometimes a little bit removed when you're not seeing the light bulbs go on. So although it's some easier in a classroom to pick that up, that's a skill that you have to sort of think about bringing into online learning, but also recognizing that it's not always the right solution for a particular topic. So I kind of have a foot in both camps on that one, which I know is a bit of a non-answer answer, but it depends, which is another non-answer answer.
Well, my question wasn't, should we do online or classroom? It was, how much of an overlap is there? When you're working with the subject matter experts, and like this is true whether it's online or in the classroom, there is always a temptation for them to say, and put this in. And put this in. And we must have this. And in fact, we've got a workshop this afternoon, after yours, which has been talking about how to regain control of the hose pipe of content people are trying to thrust into your course. That's one of the joys of working with subject matter experts. In your experience of doing this, talking about maximizing your impact and your influence, how can you make the most of your SMEs while at the same time retaining control over what you're producing at the end?
Reining them in, yes. I think one of the key things that I find with that is, before they even start to spout out what they think they need to have in that particular program, is to share with them the fact-finding process.
So you've done your questions, you've got your checklist, right? Look, this is the scope, the sort of context of what we're doing. Yeah,
absolutely. But also then getting them to engage with who we're doing it for.
Right.
So instead of coming to me with, I have all of this great content for underwater basket weaving, is, okay, this client operates in this industry. So what you need to do is to look at the content that you've got and tell me what elements are relevant to them and their industry, which gives me the ability then to start putting my editor head on and going, that's a great piece of content, but it's not relevant for this client. And it's engaging that SME with that part of the process, but also getting them to engage with the fact that, for me, quite a lot of the time, the SME who's writing it is also the person who's going to have to deliver it. And then saying, can you deliver? You've given me this huge volume of content, which is fantastic, brilliant.
Yes.
Can you actually do that in a 3-hour online session? I don't think so.
Okay.
So how are you going to start to slim that down? And it's getting them involved in that process.
Well, you have to. You can't force it on them, otherwise you're going to lose all the enthusiasm. And retaining that enthusiasm, whether it's shows in the delivery or whether it's just part of getting them involved in the process in a happy way, is going to be crucial. So I guess that another part of maximizing your influence is going to be, as well as your credibility and your flexibility in your process, is going to be making sure that the people you're working with are happy to be part of your team.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, happy team, happy people. It's wearing lots of hats.
Yes.
It's not as simple as just taking that order.
No.
It is being able to shift through those different sort of sections, if you like, of providing that service in your head and thinking, how can we best meet this need? How can I make this learning need or this skill gap or whatever it is, how can I make that go away? How can I provide a solution? And it's being a solution provider, I think, that is the important mindset. I'm not just going to say, yes, that's fine, underwater basket weaving level 3 next week, but let me find out why you think you need that, and then let me tell you how I can help you get to a point where you don't need that anymore. And that might be by providing exactly what you've asked me for, although that happens very, very rarely. Or, you know, it may be blending various different bits of content together to give you something that you want. Communicating is really important with that. You know, asking lots and lots and lots of questions and engaging as many people as you can in the process whilst maintaining control over the top.
Right, and this business of maintaining control of the top, maintaining the quality and what have you, so that your credibility isn't ultimately threatened. Have you ever been in the position of thinking, this is not worth it, not financially speaking, but this is not worth it in terms of my credibility, and I have to walk away from it?
Absolutely.
So can you give us an anonymized version of what happened?
I can try. Yes. Oh, because of course now the first thing I want to say is who it's for. That was unfair. Right, let's try that again. Yes, it was very much being asked to provide a program of learning, a long program of learning, to manage change in a particular working environment, that I very quickly realized was actually more about bullying.
Oh, right.
And when I was looking and thinking, I cannot be involved in this, you know, not just me personally, but my company cannot be involved in this process. This isn't about providing solutions, providing resettlement structure. This is about bullying people not to complain about the fact they're going to be made redundant. And I just thought, I can't do that.
So how did you position that to your client? To
my client, I expressed my no by explaining that I didn't feel we were the appropriate provider. I said, you know, looking at the learning need, that I didn't feel that Lightning Training was the right client for them and that they ought to look in-house to their internal training team to provide that service. And it wasn't particularly well received. And I knew why. You know, they didn't want to use their internal team because of the emotion around this particular program. But I also thought, you know, I can't put my trainers in that position of being asked to put across these key messages that I fundamentally disagree with. I don't think that's the right thing to do. So walked away. And it's frightening when you do that. You know, I think whether you've been in business for 20 years or 20 minutes, it's frightening when you get that conviction and say, I have to say no. I have to walk away. This is not something that I feel we can be involved in.
You're an external provider. It threatens your bank balance to do that, no question about it. But you can walk away.
Yes.
I'm working in a training department. Well, I don't have to sell to meet my mortgage this month, but it might threaten my job. So do you have any thoughts? Because ultimately, I think it all comes down to this question, maximizing your impact, down to the ability to face somebody down and say, well, perhaps I'm expressing it too dramatically, but to be able to say, no, that isn't right. And that's where my credibility is trumping everything else. Any thoughts from your experience working as an internal provider on how people in departments can do that?
I think you do have to get brave and put your big girl pants on, because it's, you know, again, I have experience of that. Not quite as dramatic as
putting big girl pants on.
Putting my big girl pants on, and over my trousers too. It's the whole thing of sometimes being asked to do something that you're either not comfortable with or actually that you can't. And it was more of the can't that was my experience. You know, we want you to go and do this, and was having to stand there and say, I'm not the best person for this job because I can't do that. You know, I just don't have the skill set that you think I have to be able to do it. I don't have the experience to be able to do it. And that did happen to me when I was working full-time for, you know, an internal team of trainers. And it is uncomfortable because you know, it goes against, I think, your sort of natural human want to make people happy and to
help and to do your job.
Exactly.
But actually, the job does rely on that last bit of being able to say no.
And it was one of the more uncomfortable conversations I'd had with a line manager in my time.
So I'm just going to wrap up then. There are 5 things we need in order to have our maximum effectiveness and impact. You've got to have flexibility, but that is always trumped by credibility. You have to have a process to underpin it all. So you've got to ask the right questions at the right time to the right people. You've got to make sure your people and your team are happy.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you have to be able to say no and explain why.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just solve the problem.
Absolutely. I see what the problem is. It's all gone.
Fantastic. All right, we're looking forward to doing some more Google Hangouts later on today at the Learning Technology Summer Forum here in London. And of course, later on in the year, we'll be running a wider and longer series of Google Hangouts, and we hope that you'll join us then. Bye for now.